Today we are going to talk about the dungeon known as Befallen. Befallen is one of the most infamous dungeons on all of Norath, but it was not only originally built to serve as a home to undead and dark magic. It was designed and built by the Order of Mars Fist, a guild of knights and clerics dedicated to the twin gods Erolici and Mythennial Mar. The Order needed a stronghold to aid them in their efforts to pacify and patrol the common lands. Already in control of Freeport, the Order saw this, their westerly stronghold called the Chapter House of the Fist, as a way to expand their forces throughout the western common lands. Under the command of High Lord William Taros, the Order set about their business. Now having two strong bases, the Order of Mars Fist spread their influence from the Ocean of Tears to Kithakor Forest, securing roads, eliminating bandits, and driving the Death Fist orcs to the brink of extinction. When the Knights of the Order found things of dangerous power, they stored them away deep within the chapter house for safekeeping. Among these objects was an ancient elven weapon of power, known as the Thex Mallet. After many decades of success, the Order suffered a critical setback. A patrol of paladins found a sick, starved, half-mad wanderer in the western common lands. Though he was barely able to speak, the paladins learned his name was Gynok Moltar. In his fevered ramblings, Moltar claimed he had been cursed by Gnoll shamans and driven into exile. Concerned for his safety, the patrol brought him back to the chapter house, in hopes of nursing him to health. Unbeknownst to the Order, Moltar had a long history of unscrupulous behavior, but this vile betrayal within Befallen was the worst. A petty thief and smuggler, Gynok had managed to rise to a position of power and authority within the merchant community of Kinos long ago, through shady deals and blackmail. When a caravan set out to find a commerce route from Kinos to Hallis, Gynok managed to secure a position on it. The group nearly died in the frozen lands of the north, but they had made it to Hallis. There the barbarians told them of a quicker path between Hallis and Kinos, through the burrow of the Blackburrow Knolls. An expedition was arranged to see if a route through the Knolls' territory could be established. The expedition was met by Opala of Blackburrow, an old wise Gnoll shaman who saw that her people needed to live peacefully with their neighbors if they were to thrive. Opala met with the traders in peace, and offered to put out a feast in their honor. When the traders asked how they could be sure the other Knolls would obey Opala, she showed them 4 rings she wore on her right hand, the badge of her authority. Immediately, Gynok lusted after these rings, and schemed to steal them. After the feast, when other traders and Knolls were asleep, he snuck into Opala's quarters and tried to remove the rings. Opala awoke and began to raise alarm. Gynok panicked and cut off the shaman's hand to retrieve the rings. The shaman survived and refused to allow the traders to be killed, as they had entered the Gnoll home under her promise of safety. She declared war between the Knolls of Blackburrow and the humans of Kinos and barbarians of Hallis. She also cursed Gynok Moltar and his family, and the angry residents of Kinos banished him for his evil act. Some months later, he was led into Befallen by the Knights of the Order of Mars Fist, starving and dehydrated. Once Gynok had recovered his wits somewhat, he repaid this kindness by killing the knights watching over him, sacrificing them on a defiled altar to any god willing to give him the power to destroy Blackburrow and Kinos. The dark, cursed magic that answers his calls indeed gave him such power, but also bound him to the site of his vile deed, preventing him from ever using that power to gain his desires. The exact nature of the dread power that answered Moltar's call is not well understood even to this day, and at best can only be described as a thinking, malignant force. Creating a curse destroyed all those who dwelled within the chapter house. Even Gynok was killed, although he raised within minutes as an undead himself. The clouds spread out from the chapter house to destroy small villages, whole caravans, and even to raise a horde of undead at an old battlefield around a tower in the eastern Commonlands. But the power of malignancy was not limitless, and killing and perverting so many holy men and women drained much of its foul power. When dawn broke, on the second day, the dark force was drawn back to the bunker where Moltar's corpse lay, and then bound within. Though its evil had spread for miles on its first night of existence, the evil could no longer break free of the bunker, but was limited to toying with those willing to enter. The Order of Mars Fist never recovered from the loss of their main stronghold, although the Knights of Truth and Priests of Mar rose up to take their place. For decades, none entered the former chapter house, which became known as Befallen. So quick was the destruction of the Order's base, and so complete was its transformation to a place of evil, that many visitors to the Common Lands assumed Befallen was a different location entirely. Gynok Moltar ruled over Befallen as a petty warlord, luring the occasional adventurer into his lair, and making deals with necromancers wishing to study Befallen's power. Moltar's power was relatively weak in terms of the great powers of Antonica, but with no Order of Mars Fist to raise an army against him, he endured as a force to be reckoned with in the Common Lands, despite being unable to leave Befallen himself. Many High Elves entered Befallen, searching for one of the objects the Order had placed within for safekeeping, the Thex Mallet. A few managed to find this object, yet were each trapped by the evil of Befallen and kept from carrying the artifact back to Fëdor. Word of these expeditions eventually reached the Dark Elves of Neriak, who conclude that if an elven artifact resided within Befallen, the place must be the remnants of the elven empire that stood where the Desert of Ro is now found. A force of Dark Elves commanded by the Shadow Knight Lord Larad traveled to Befallen to claim it and the Thex Mallet for the greater glory of Neriak. Lord Larad and his brace for necromancers assaulted Befallen directly, decimating the undead of Gynok Moltar. Moltar managed to hold the western wing of the second level, granting Larad dominion over the rest of the dungeon. Larad found the Thex Mallet and claimed it for himself. Impressed by the power of the Dark Elf commander, the evil force of Befallen threw aside its weak vessel, Moltar, and set its hooks into the new Shadow Knight. Larad found he could now command the undead of Befallen, and made preparations to return to Neriak at the head of a conquering army. To Larad's surprise, however, he was unable to leave the dungeon without suffering great pain. He too had fallen prey to the curse of Befallen. Tales of Befallen's power spread far beyond the Common Lands, eventually reaching Inithul Swamp. There it attracted the attention of Radak Brokenskull, a troll shadow knight of great power. Brokenskull wished to reunite the troll clans of Norath under his control, and then lead them in a conquest against the rest of the world. Though a mighty warrior and a fair leader for a troll, Brokenskull lacked the raw power to bring his splintered people together. In the tales of Befallen's undead masses, the troll saw an opportunity to gain the forces he required. Brokenskull arrived to find Lord Larad raging against Befallen itself, with only a tenuous grip on command of the dungeon. Gynok Moltar fought him at every turn, stealing the Thex Mallet and hiding it in pieces throughout the stronghold. The troll offered his services to first Larad and then Moltar, playing the two undead against one another. When both were weakened and disadvantaged, both by their fighting and his maneuvering, Brokenskull betrayed them both, stealing Moltar's sword and using it to destroy every living creature loyal to either Moltar or Larad. When both undead turned on him in fury at his betrayal, he proved unable to destroy them both, and was forced to withdraw to an abandoned corner of Befallen to lick his wounds. The evil that inhabited Befallen knew a conqueror when it saw one, and granted Brokenskull its dark authority. He was made the new Lord of Befallen, able to send its legions in nighttime raids against nearby villages and camps. But when the troll attempted to march his new forces to Inithul Swamp, he discovered himself unable to leave the dungeon. Another dark villain had been caught by Befallen's dark curse. Matters in Befallen remained unchanged for decades, with Radak Brokenskull unquestioned ruler of the place of evil, but unable to send his forces further afield than one night's march. A decade ago, though, new forces came to Befallen, offering to aid Brokenskull in overcoming his limitation. Members of the Burning Dead, the unforbidden gnomish guild of necromancers, came to Befallen to offer a deal. Led by Menizia the Thaumaturge, the gnomes promised Broken Skull they would serve him and seek a way to free him of Befallen's grip, in return for being allowed to live in Befallen and study its dark magics. Frustrated with the limited scope of his efforts thus far, Broken Skull agreed. Secretly, of course, Menizia had no intention of freeing Redact Broken Skull, though she certainly spent a great deal of time and effort researching the limits and range of the evil power's domain. In truth, Menizia planned to use the power of Befallen for her own fell purposes. She was a disciple of the teachings of a powerful gnomish necromancer who lived centuries before, the great Marak Jaw. Once a mighty force in Teneria, Jaw had fought against the elves of the Takish Hiz and come close to exerting dominion over half the continent before he and the Burning Dead were stopped by the paladins of Prexus. Since his loss, gnomish necromancers had continually sought a way to recapture or recreate his power, but Menizia hoped to do more than that. She planned to bring back Jaw himself. The situation again quieted until 2 years ago, when Befallen was invaded by a force even more evil than itself. Lannis Tavil, a dark elf called the Daughter of Hate, some say she was the daughter of Inaruk himself, used the dungeon as a place of refuge when she rebelled against the priests of Inaruk. She wrestled control of the dungeon from Redact Broken Skull, breaking apart his sword and restricting him to the western wing of the second floor, along with Gynok Moltor. The thaumaturge, Menizia of the Burning Dead, struck a deal with Lannis, as she had with Broken Skull, promising not to act against Lannis in return for permission to remain in Befallen. With her fanatical followers, the Daughter of Hate made plans in Befallen that were intended to make her powerful enough to master Neriak, and in time Inaruk himself. Unwilling to risk the wrath of a god interfering with her plans, one way or another, the evil power of Befallen simply ignored Lannis, allowing her to move freely within the stronghold. The Burning Dead who lived within Befallen similarly saw no need to resist, as long as Lannis made no move against them, and took the opportunity to learn further secrets of necromancy from the Daughter of Hate and her followers. Lannis's plans came to a short and bloody end when she was betrayed and captured Uruk. Her surviving followers fled Befallen for the Wraith Mountains. There they formed the Temple of Malice, soon becoming known as the Primordial Malice. Though a few free-willed undead and gnome necromancers followed the Primordial Malice into the mountains, and some of the Dark Elves stayed in Befallen, most of Befallen's residents considered this a return to business as usual. Menizia took this opportunity to claim Befallen for herself, and gathered allies to help her keep Gynok or Redact from regaining control of the stronghold. The time was ripe for Menizia to act. Using the lore she had gathered from the servants of Redact Broken Skull and the worshippers of Lannis, the thaumaturge undertook the ritual return Marak Jaw to life. The rite took an entire month and involved acts of vile depravity. Menizia forced a connection with the evil force of Befallen and called upon its power to restore Jaw to mortality. Though the effort left Menizia exhausted, it also succeeded. She brought Marak Jaw back from the halls of the dead. Further, the thaumaturge managed what no necromancer before her had in mastering the curse of Befallen. Whatever the force is that inhabits Befallen, it knew it had been outdone, although it's transferred its primal essence, its raw power, into the remains of High Lord William Tyros, creating a risen commander of dreadful power, and granting Marak Jaw its authority over the undead that ruled Befallen. Marak Jaw is Lord of Befallen, and more than that, is free of its curse. Despite this, he has yet to leave or even exert his influence beyond the dungeon's walls. Fortunately for the inhabitants of the Commonlands, he was returned to life with only a portion of his previous power. Jaw knows many will rise against him once his presence becomes common knowledge, and he does not wish to face these foes until he has his full might. Jaw is convinced the secret to regaining his lost glory resides within Befallen, and has begun gathering scholars, necromancers, and wizened undead to him to aid his frantic research, all in the hope of discovering Befallen's last secret. In the process, he has begun to spread rumors that Befallen has become a school of necromancy, prompting young necromancers, shadow knights, and even some evil clerics to travel there in hopes of learning dark arts. Jaw has used this to his advantage, gaining cheap and replaceable servants for the burning dead, but his true goal is conquest, not education. Befallen is well known, but not well understood. Scholars throughout the world debate its origin and significance, and locals repeat every claim made by adventurer merchants, and other locals that matter, of course. So that is the story of Befallen. Now there are some rumors around Norath about the dungeon itself. You may hear these here or there from NPCs or not, but we can go over some of them here. Befallen is actually the lost elven city of the Takish Hiz, or perhaps one of the last remaining outposts. This is false. It's a common misconception. The Takish Hiz is found in the desert of Ro, which is very close in proximity. Most likely the phantom city that haunts the oasis of Mar, and Befallen has nothing to do with it. Another rumor you may hear is that the forces of Neriak want to claim Befallen, and a large army is moving towards the dungeon. This is partially true. Queen Christianos of Neriak has commanded the dead to find the Thek's mallet, which lies within Befallen, but there's no army on the march. Dark Elf Shadow Knight Kizdine Gix leads a small force of raiders who watch and occasionally enter Befallen, but there are no more than a dozen within his band. The dungeon is a portal to the Plane of Disease, home of Bertoculus. This is just false. The Dark Elves have already taken control of Befallen, and they now use it as a trap to catch the good and pure. This is also false. This rumor was started because a group of Dark Elf rebels did briefly take control of the dungeon under the command of Lannis Tavil, the daughter of Hate. Lannis was captured and killed, though, and her followers fled to the Wraith Mountains, as you know. The true master of Befallen is a troll. Partially true. The troll Shadow Knight Radak Broken Skull was formerly the lord there, but as you now know, Marak Jaw rules the dungeon and is keeping the darkness weakened. Befallen is a school for necromancers and shadow knights. It's partially true. The neophytes there prove themselves capable and may be taught by members of the Burning Dead, but in general, the new students are just used as labor and not really taught anything. A pool of healing water exists at the bottom of Befallen, which can cure any wound, poison, or disease. False. There is a well in there that drops you to the bottom. During the day, the undead of the dungeon are asleep. This is also false, but it does seem that the undead patrol less often outside of the dungeon during the day. A powerful necromancer has been raised from the dead and now rules Befallen. This rumor is true, so it's not much of a rumor, but it's spoken as a rumor. So that concludes Befallen for now. Pretty cool dungeon. It's one of my favorites. Have a lot of good experiences there. Some good XP, nice soloing, good grouping, and all of that. Share down in the comments some of your experiences that you've had here in Befallen, and we'll see you in the next one.